Kia ora koutou katoa. I am Satyamitra Ashok at Risk New Zealand, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to our June 2020 Lunchtime Seminar. I hope all of you and your families are doing well and have gotten used to life in level 2, which is almost business as usual, but not quite. Risk New Zealand's lunchtime seminars run on the first Tuesday of most months, featuring different speakers, and remains one of RiskNZ's most popular events. We are proud to have continued to deliver this through the last quarter, despite all the changes around us. I would like to thank and acknowledge the support of Risk New Zealand's partners who make this possible. Our premier partner, Marsh, our crisis management partner, F24, our key lunchtime seminar partners, SAI Global and Safety Associates, our lunchtime seminar supporters, which are our venues across the country, KPMG, Watercare, Navigatus, Christchurch City Council, and PowerCo. Today's Risk New Zealand lunchtime seminar is being delivered only as a webinar. All participants are on mute, but please feel free to type questions straight into the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screens at any time during the session. Our speaker will answer your typed questions at the end of his presentation. If you are joining us via a telephone and not on a computer, then unfortunately you won't be able to ask a question during the seminar. You can send any questions later to adminofficer@risknz.org.nz, and we will endeavour to have them answered by the speaker at the earliest. It is my pleasure today to introduce our speaker. Martin Petz has worked in crisis management, emergency notification, IT business continuity, and data protection for over 20 years. Martin is responsible for corporate development and all F24 business in the region and manages operations with passion, driving forward client success with F24's products and solutions for alerting, crisis management, and critical communications on an international scale. Martin is also the author of the upcoming book, Why My Business is Better Than Yours, Mine Can Thrive Through a Crisis. Today, Martin will be providing an overview on effective crisis management and communications. Thank you, Martin, for inviting us into your home for this seminar. Over to you for the presentation.
Thank you, Satya. Kia ora, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen. Hopefully you can see me. Sorry, I'm sitting over to the right. I'm making sure I'm near the microphone because I wanted to make sure you can hear me clearly. So as Satya said, thank you very much for joining today. I'm at home, as Satya said. I've packed the kids away with mummy. They've gone to the playground, so hopefully no interruptions. I always prefer doing these things face to face, so hopefully I'll have the opportunity to do that another time when we can all get together a little bit more easily. So as Satya said, we're going to be talking about crisis management and communication and managing any potential waves of COVID-19 that we may experience in New Zealand, but we'll be talking about other countries a little bit as well. Also, I've got a couple of different screens here, so forgive me if I'm looking around a little bit at different slides and notes and stuff. So yeah, this presentation really is to kind of supplement some of the videos that we've made that have been publicized in the Risk New Zealand newsletter. So hopefully some of you have seen those and have got value from those videos as well. Obviously, as Satya said, very happy to get questions today at the end of this presentation, or I'll put my contact details up later if you want to email me stuff direct as well. Then very happy to answer your questions. So we're going to attempt to tackle today really how organizations best communicate during a crisis, but really in a reliable and flexible manner. And we're going to kind of go through all the stages from early stage to the recovery stage, which is certainly for the first wave of infection. That's kind of where we're kind of getting to in New Zealand, probably different for other countries, especially US and Europe. But anyway, we're going to be talking about what phases we should be prepared to handle, and also how we can manage any secondary or tertiary waves. So a quick overview of the agenda. So we're going to be looking at different types of potential COVID-19 waves, as I said, and what organizations may need to consider when addressing the return of workforces. A lot of you may well be going through getting your workforces, getting your employees back into the office. It'd be good to get your comments. Yeah, even if you haven't got questions, any comments are also welcome, and I'll have a look at those at the end. We're also going to look at the different crisis phases. So we talk a lot to clients about different phases and how you manage through the different phases. That an organization can really adopt these phases to manage a crisis situation, and the principles we're going to talk about can be used for kind of all incidents across all operations, whether it's COVID-19 or not. Ideally, obviously, you know, I'm selling a software service, so I hopefully this is definitely not a sales presentation, but I bear in mind that, you know, we really advocate that people use a crisis management software, potentially help organizations ride these potential waves. Then we're going to focus on the importance of effective communications, and that can really help ensure that incidents of all types can really be dealt with in a cohesive and efficient manner. And this should also enable your organization to operate at its maximum potential during different waves or potential waves of COVID-19 or any other crisis for that matter. And effective communications during a crisis really can make the difference between a business that survives or even thrives through a crisis and one that may suffer a larger impact or even failure. So we're going to try this interactive poll question, make sure that everyone's engaged, everyone's paying attention. So I want to get your feedback before we start on, will New Zealand, or do you think that New Zealand will need to reopen its borders for business before the risk of reintroducing COVID-19 is over? So Satya's controlling this. So this is fantastic. We're getting 10 replies so far. That's really good. Over half of you now. Give it a couple more seconds, Satya, then close it. Go ahead and close it, Satya, now. Okay, great. And I don't know, is that being displayed for everyone? I hope it is. So, oh, fantastic. So hopefully you can see that on your screens now, 79%. And this is kind of what I suspected the answer might be. 79% are saying that yes, New Zealand will need to reopen its borders before the risk of reintroducing COVID-19 is over. And you know, there's a lot of discussion going on around this right now. And again, if we were face to face, it'd be good to have a discussion about this. But I tend to agree with the answer. I think we are going to need to reopen our borders before the risk of reinfection is over. So thanks very much for answering that. We've got a couple more questions later, so stay engaged. Thank you, Satya. Can you get rid of that? Hopefully you can see the screen. Okay, so let's have a look at some thoughts, some expert thoughts around potential different types of COVID or pandemic waves that we might get on the horizon. And this, of course, this is really quite tricky to predict for New Zealand, especially New Zealand is quite, as you all probably gather, is quite unique a little bit in the world, where we're almost the only country that, well, depending on whether you're talking about China and Wuhan, it's kind of getting things down to almost zero as well now. But New Zealand is kind of the only country that's seemed to be able to really keep the infection down and almost eradicate the infection now. But also during this conversation, I really want to highlight that pretty much every seasonal flu really did start out as a pandemic flu, which was kind of much more virulent when it was first realized because it was new in the human population. So lots of conversations that I've been doing, lots of research for the videos and for this presentation. People are talking about will things ever return to normal, or will we be forever saddled with a new normal, which is a phrase that everyone is using. Experts are saying that things may never return to normal. I think, in fact, last week, or maybe the week before, the World Health Organization suggested that COVID-19 may never go away. But on the other side of things, during this research, I was looking at, there's a couple of other pandemics, outbreaks of flu. There was a 1957 Asian flu and a 1968 Hong Kong flu, that largely have been forgotten. Indeed, the 1918 Spanish flu was not talked about that much until recently, and seems to be the pandemic that everyone turns back to kind of see and try and predict how this one may turn out. Of course, the world has changed a lot since 1918, so it's quite difficult to predict what's going to happen. So New Zealand, like I said, New Zealand's done very well in almost eradicating COVID-19, but what is going to happen when New Zealand needs to reopen for business? I think last week or maybe this week, last week I was hearing that the Avatar filming crew has been allowed to come into the country, and you can kind of already see the relaxation of some of the rules, and the more people that are let into New Zealand, I guess the more likely we may see people not self-isolating for 14 days or trying to avoid those restrictions and trying to get to work or whatever they came over here to do. So it all gets much more difficult to manage, much more difficult to guarantee that COVID-19 is not reintroduced. So this all needs to be done really very, very carefully. And another question mark is whether New Zealand may suffer more than some other countries because of the low population immunity, because lower numbers of people within New Zealand have been exposed to COVID-19 compared to the other end of the spectrum, like Sweden, for example. So leading experts really do believe, just coming onto the graph on the slide, so leading experts do believe that there could be three main different types of potential waves that populations can experience or could experience. And just running through these different colored lines just quickly. So the blue line, so all three lines start on the left-hand side where it's indicated April 2020, which obviously is kind of the peak, not including China. So China obviously started a lot earlier than that, but most other countries outside the China region saw a peak in April 2020. And the blue line, continuing from the peak in April 2020, really is kind of, I don't know, maybe you'll have comments on this, but might be a path that New Zealand might follow. And really see the initial peak in April followed by the blue line, which is a lot of smaller peaks. So a larger initial peak followed by the smaller blue peaks. The second line, the red line, is kind of a largely predicted scenario, and it was one that was true of the 1918 Spanish flu, where the initial peak was relatively small, with the second wave being much larger and having a bigger impact. And then the second peak for the Spanish flu was much more deadly and occurred about 6 months after the initial peak. And then the last line, the green line here, really shows more of a slow burn, and some experts think that it could be almost the worst of the three scenarios, where despite all the measures, all the regulations, all the best endeavors to combat the virus, it continues to come back. And I think we'll probably see this kind of wave in Europe and US and potentially UK. A lot of you may be able to tell I'm from the UK, so I'm kind of watching the UK news quite a lot as well. And it's always, it seems a balance. You know, people are talking about a vaccine, but that could be a year or two away. You could talk about population immunity, that could or could not happen, or it will happen eventually, but it may not happen that quickly. And then it's all a balance between going back to business, reopening borders, and government control and lockdown restrictions, really. So yeah, so it could flare up in those countries, Europe, US, to a similar intensity, despite all the measures to safeguard, because a lot of countries in Europe right now are kind of going back to normal, even though there's a lot of infection within the population. So how about the return to normal? So I think at least in the short term, or short to medium term, there will be a new normal, and that's what we're talking about in this slide. So what will this look like? And I'm sure a lot of your organizations are going through this, these kind of exercises, implementing these kind of measures right now. So with physical distancing, places of work could recover more quickly and can get back to work, and also hopefully be more prepared for any future multiple waves potentially. And this is, again, things that you will probably be already working on, like moving lower numbers of desks, more space between desks, more space between furniture, maybe walls to kind of cordon off different areas, potentially one-way systems around buildings. You see that in supermarkets and different shops, that people are going in one way and coming out a different way, just to keep people apart. And also, obviously establishing cleanliness, hand sanitation stations, things like that, and new procedures in potentially canteens, office kitchens, things like that. Even moving down to shared breakout rooms, shared break rooms, or whatever might be required. So also another thing we need to think about is what potential measures will be required to track and trace employees, and how much of that responsibility rests with the employer. So we're really interested to get your comments on that as well. Of course, organizations really do have a duty of care to employees, and suppliers and customers. And that really needs to be high on the agenda. Organizations really need to demonstrate compliance, and have potentially auditable records of the steps and measures they're taking. Organizations or companies may not see the importance of that really until an infection or reinfection is experienced, and maybe even here in New Zealand, because we haven't seen a very high infection rate, people can generally maybe underestimate the importance of doing these things. And also, perhaps for all these reasons, it looks like I've spoken to a couple of companies, not just in New Zealand actually, but in Australia last week before, and it looks like there really is a slow return to the office. People are continuing to work from home if they're enabled to do so, and if it works for the organization. Many organizations actually are working very successfully with staff working from home and are continuing to do that. But however, there are drawbacks, obviously. With a distributed workforce, it becomes a lot more difficult to communicate. I talked about this in a couple of my videos. There are many IT solutions that a lot of us have implemented. We have here, we've got teams across the world, and we're using things like Microsoft Teams. We're using Zoom today, and Slack and other things like that, just to be able to communicate. And these tools have become even more crucial. So it's important to make sure that the robustness of those tools are looked at, but also it's not necessarily, these ways of communicating are not necessarily effective for emergency communication. They all potentially have a single point of failure because they're reliant on the internet. We'll talk about it later, but you can still have IT failures as in parallel with a COVID crisis. So you need to have a think about the robustness of IT solutions as well. But this is also about how, crisis communication, you've also got to think about how less enabled IT workforces, those that can't work from home because they have no IT equipment, their jobs don't require them to have IT equipment, but they may not even have email or a mobile telephone. So you need to think about how how you communicate with people, with staff that don't have or are not IT enabled, because they don't need it for their job, basically. How can you communicate, or how do you communicate with these individuals who may be distributed, or perhaps even in future waves they may be furloughed? So we've at F24 we've seen many clients using emergency notification solutions for enabling multiple communication channels. So getting through to people that may not be using the internet or tools on the internet to be able to receive or transmit communications. It really makes sense for crisis communication to enable multiple communication channels. So distributed workforces are able to receive important communications via other means, i.e. SMS, text message, or voice call, for example. And that could be, the voice call could be to mobile phone or to landline. So instructions, our clients have been using emergency notifications to advise of lockdowns, especially between bordering countries or even regions that have different lockdown restrictions, and maybe even been cordoned off or divided from other regions. And this has been where employees have been commuting across borders, for example, or not fully aware of different rules in different areas. Or like I say, closure of borders or localized lockdowns. So with all the changes through potential reoccurring waves that we might see, the need for an organization to be agile and flexible, it's never really been more important than it is right now, with things still looking uncertain potentially for the future, or for the short and medium term. So really now, and you've probably done this as a business already, but now is really the time to shift from business continuity and move into crisis management mode. But I'm sure a lot of your organizations are in crisis management mode right now anyway. And we really want to talk about handling the crisis situation easily and professionally to keep your business moving, to keep your organization moving. So the switch to crisis mode, like I say, has probably already happened within your organization. I'm sure you're already well down the road to recovery in terms of this initial wave, and I'm sure you're into your kind of back to work or back into the office programs for this initial wave. Effective crisis management really does need a clear command and control process, and there are five. I'm sure most of you know about these, but there are five recognized phases during a crisis that need to be considered and used to manage the situation. And as you can see here, so that typically they're kind of defined through these five different phases, or these five different labels. So the first one is monitoring, and obviously monitoring is all about the kind of the preparation for a crisis situation. It's all about things like defining defining your different response teams, defining different teams that are needed within a certain situation, certain crisis, preparing plans, preparing action checklists for different teams, different individuals to carry out in certain situations, and it's really all about evaluating the risks. You know, I'm sure you've done your business impact analysis and things like that, but evaluating the risks while monitoring the situation. And obviously a bit of an airport reference with the control tower, but it's really much like a control tower team would manage a situation, and have the visibility to see what's going on. Mobilization is again pretty self-explanatory, but it's when we need to communicate with our stakeholders and get response teams moving as quickly as possible. The handling phase is really, again, how do you handle the crisis situation, the incident, no matter how small or large it is. And handling really is about taking your plans, taking your checklists and actions and making them happen. And whilst handling, you also want to be making sure you're keeping a cohesive running log of relevant events. And there's several ways of doing that. Normalisation is navigating away from the incident and getting back, trying to get back to normal and recovery. And then finally, the evaluation phase, that's assessing what went on, what went right, what went wrong, and really helping, that really helps to give it helps to have a comprehensive and auditable log and report, so that you've got something to evaluate, something to remind you what happened and potentially make improvements for future exercises or future real situations. So just to go into these phases in a little bit more detail. So the monitoring phase, this is, like I said, this is all about the planning and the preparation. But more importantly, it's actually about listening and analyzing. So now in the monitoring phase, you have the time to create and adapt your actions, your checklists for different teams, different individuals, but also you may need to adapt these checklists during the crisis, because you could have changing circumstances, and crises are always evolving, always changing, and it's about responding to the now. You need to be creating, in the monitoring phase, you need to be creating and amending groups and teams, making sure you have the right people in the right teams to respond to the different crisis situation, and who you really will need to communicate with during a incident of the type that you're planning for. This is the next bullet point here really is key, and that's having up-to-date contact details. So not having up-to-date contact details is actually the #1 reason for an emergency communication plan to fail. But there are tools to enable, for example, automated interfaces between for example, your HR system, if that's your one true source of data when it comes to contact information for your teams, for your general staff. Having a link between your HR system and any notification system that you're using, any crisis management system that you're using, is the best way of making sure that your contact list that you're going to be using for your communications is up to date. Also, make sure you define your communication messages, your templates in advance. Crisis situations are chaotic by their nature, so it always makes sense to do this preparation in advance, create and prepare for predicted scenarios, but also make sure that these messages can be adapted to the actual situation that is at hand, and potentially have you can change to make sure you can change them at time of activation, or even potentially write new messages if you need to. But have those templates, those messages in reserve, so that you are prepared for issuing those messages quickly and concisely. So, Kathy, if you're still there, fantastic. So if you're still awake, is your organization planning for a second, at least don't worry about a third wave for now, but is your organization planning for a second wave of COVID-19 in New Zealand? And we'll give this 10 seconds or so for everyone to answer. Fantastic. Almost half of you answered so far. Is your organization planning for a second wave of COVID-19 infection in New Zealand? Okay, let's give it 5 more seconds, Sathya. And we've got just about half, over half now. Fantastic. So let's close that one, please, Sathya, and display. So we're at 67%, or 8 out of the 22 people I think that are online have said that you are planning for a second wave, but quite a high percentage. I know it's quite low numbers here, but quite a high percentage that are not planning for a second wave. Would be great to kind of get comments and questions and even a discussion around this at another point. But thank you again very much for your answers. I personally think I would be at least thinking about a second wave. So yeah, be good to get your comments. Thanks, Satya. Okay. Hopefully you can see my screen. Okay. Okay, so the next phase is the mobilization phase. And this really is about the need to communicate quickly via multiple means or channels. And you can see here, we're just using a kind of a graphical representation of our solution. Here you've got, for example, a emergency or crisis manager initiating an alert on the left-hand side, and an alert can be initiated in several different ways. So it could be via the internet, via a telephone, even by a fax machine, etc., etc. So there's lots of different ways. Obviously, an emergency or crisis manager doesn't know where he or she will be when the crisis hits or when the alert is needed. So there's lots of ways of initiating an alert. And then the software will communicate with the teams, with the individuals you need to communicate with via several different channels. So this could be the same message going out on, as it says on the right-hand side on the slide. You could be sending out a message via email, landline, or mobile telephone call, which is usually a recorded message. Push notification to a smartphone app, for example. Text message is always very popular, or even a fax and a pager. You know, the more channels you can use, generally clients will use more channels depending on the importance or the impact of the situation. Because you're more likely to get hold of someone if you use different channels. And if you lose a channel, or they haven't got their mobile phone with them, for example, then they'll pick it up on potentially on a landline or whatever it might be. So that's the way messages can be sent out. The other important things is getting a confirmation of receipt. So that's getting a quick yes, I've received your message, or I have understood the message, or even I'm responding to say I'm safe or I need help. You know, so that's quick reaction from the staff that you've asked them a question, they've responded very quickly over the notification tool. It might even be how far are you from, if you're communicating with a response team, it might be how far are you from site, for example. So that's two-way messaging is crucial really in crisis management. And then real-time reports are also generated by the system automatically, so that your crisis management team can evaluate what's going on and potentially again review everything after the event and see how to improve. Satya and I were actually talking about maybe doing a demo of the software during this seminar, but time would not really permit, and it's quite difficult. If we were face to face, it would be quite easy to do a quick run through and alert people to their phones and everything in the demo, but we can maybe keep that for another day. Okay, so the handling phase is the next phase. So handling, one of the key parts of the handling phase is that any incidents that are being handled need to be logged in detail. So some kind of process or a system really should be considered to be able to record an incident and all the phases accordingly. So during an incident, preparation in the monitoring phase should really enable you to utilize your we talked about checklists, and distributing those checklists, those actions to the appropriate teams, but doing, or appropriate experts or individuals, but doing that in an auditable manner. So you will want to see who received which task when they actioned that action. But also, so situation debriefs are also crucial in this phase. So your crisis team, you'll want your crisis team and other key teams to have regular meetings, and with COVID-19, that could be on the telephone via instant telephone conference, for example, or over any tool that you care to use. But even in person now, I guess we have less restrictions. But again, logging and recording what's being said, what's being decided are crucial in the handling phase. So also with an open incident on kind of operational running logs, it could be automatically added. So these things can be done automatically with the right service, right software. But also I think, and would be good to talk to you about this, but it's good to consider multiple crisis situations. So, for example, what would happen if an organization had a sustained cyber attack, for example, or other serious business disruption during a COVID-19 wave. So business continuity plans really will be tested with those kind of situations, but make sure you plan and rehearse for more than one situation too. So in terms of the handling phase, you really need to be able to act and react to ever-changing circumstances. This could include things like creation of exclusion zones or denial of access to buildings, or shutdown of buildings, loss of IT systems. So typical kind of outside of COVID-19 business continuity scenarios are still obviously a major threat throughout the whole COVID-19 crisis. And then normalisation. So normalisation, obviously the mobilisation, the previous mobilisation, the handling phases will be tough or have been tough, but the return to normal is often equally as daunting. You just need to think about what we're all facing right now with trying to get back to normal after the initial COVID-19 wave. Adapting plans and checklists to enable let's call it the new business as usual are really key, and you probably need to have flexibility to change these plans and checklists based on experiences learned in the earlier phases. This is really crucial to the normalization phase. So some of the considerations that you see on the slide here, so I'm sure a lot of you are working on these already, but yes, I'm sure they're being considered, but some of these things take time to implement, need different systems and processes in place to get these tools and equipment in place, and they'll take time to implement and also need continual refinement through any subsequent waves, but at least they are all helping to prepare for any subsequent wave that might hit. So what really is key is communication again. Keep coming back to communication. We are a crisis communication company, so it's kind of inevitable. But it really is key to be able to communicate with stakeholders about the new normal or the new business as usual. Employees may find it difficult to adjust. Old habits die hard, and really understand and learn what's different in the new normal. And being able to communicate quickly and efficiently, whether that's new guidelines, frequent communication of new guidelines is key, but also communicating like I talked about earlier across many different channels, it will help reinforce that message within your organization. Also communicating support and help and ways that staff can get help is also very key at this point. We haven't really talked about mental well-being and things like that, but I think those things are very key as well in all phases, not just normalization. Okay, so evaluation. So final phase. Just so bear in mind that you really could have multiple incidents. We talked about it just now, and they could all be running in different phases. So it's really important to have separate auditable reports, depending on what incident we are looking at. So having reports and logs for each incident is very important, and potentially different virtual collaboration spaces for each different incident are also very important. So different areas of a tool where response teams, experts can work on each different crisis in a different area or virtual area online is always very desirable. The auditable logs and reports, and also got to remember that any auditable and any logs and reports may need to be presented externally as well as internally. So again, inquiries, public inquiries. You can see that infections and especially with COVID-19, ways that COVID-19 may spread in future waves could well need to be investigated by government government departments or whoever it might be. But the evaluation, in the evaluation phase, the mode, you really have got time to draw on some of the lessons learnt and perhaps make further changes to your plans and checklists in order to maybe adopt new government rules or procedures that come out for subsequent phases or any crisis situation. And also you can at this point reassess the risks on the business in respect to the incidents that we've encountered and the impact that they've had on your organization. It's a good time to reassess everything from that point of view. So last poll question. So has your organization experienced, or has your organization had a second or third crisis event over the last couple of months during the first COVID-19 wave? So it'd be interesting to know and potentially get your comments if you've handled another crisis as well as COVID-19 and how difficult that was for you. But it'd be interesting to see how many organizations on the call have experienced more than one crisis situation at the same time as COVID, or one or more crisis situations at the same time as COVID-19. So most of you haven't, by the look of it. It's been one crisis situation only, but a few of you have experienced two at the same time. Give it a couple more seconds. We've only got a couple of slides left. Okay, fantastic. That's about half that have replied now. So let's shut that down. Sathya, thank you very much. So we have, if you can see that, we had 70% saying that no, you have not experienced another crisis, but 30% saying you have. So again, I guess this just shows that another incident or crisis situation can rear its head at the same time as COVID-19 or any other crisis for that matter. So it kind of makes sense to plan for that situation, but it's good that most of you haven't experienced another incident or crisis situation at the same time as COVID-19. So again, thank you very much for your answers today. That's really great. Thanks very much. So I just wanted to summarize the presentation today with one diagram, and this kind of explains, it's a bit busy, but it explains the whole process really. So the monitoring kind of got the light blue monitoring, mobilization, handling, and normalization evaluation phases you can see on the kind of bottom middle. So monitoring really takes in the kind of the emergency planning discipline, but your risk management feeds into all of that, obviously. And really encompasses the planning and monitoring and training and exercising into that monitoring phase. Then you've got your incident kicking off right in the middle there. That could be an actual incident or a simulation. And then your alarming and communication during your mobilization and handling phases. Then you have you go into your normalization and evaluation phases on the right-hand side, enabling your recovery. So having the ability to deliver and implement a crisis management program kind of aligned to these phases is essential, really for organizations to deal with potential waves of COVID-19 that we might face. Obviously, it's not guaranteed we're going to face another wave, but I think we need to be prepared. And I'm contractually by my company bound to say that a kind of a proven and established software service really can help in these situations, and it can really help during these phases to help manage efficiently and collaboratively. Collaboration is key in this whole crisis management discipline, really. And also having automated logs and records through the whole process is key for evaluation and review after the event. So If you are thinking of a software service, it really could help you, and you should really be looking for a kind of a truly integrated solution for proactive crisis management and emergency communication. You can kind of get that all in one tool these days. You can also, maybe you need to look for a solution that offers different versions depending on your needs or the organizational requirements. It's good to look for an all-in-one solution that can potentially be secure, be a secure and comprehensive emergency notification and proactive crisis management. And like I said just now, giving an online collaboration space so your different experts, your different teams can work on different situations anywhere virtually is also key. Okay, so just a very quick background into F24. So I think Satya, I'm sure we can make these slides available, so feel free to read the background. We've been around for 20 years. We're about 200 employees worldwide now. Got a lot of customers in Europe, and we've recently expanded, by the evidence of me being in Auckland. We've recently expanded into Asia Pacific. So that's, like I say, I'm sure we can share these slides for your perusal, and then some of our client logos I wanted to just get up in front of you there. So, so thank you very much. I was going to move on to some questions and comments. Hopefully we've got some. How are we looking, Satya?
Thank you, Martin. That was a really comprehensive presentation. We are moving on to questions. I think we have got one question so far. Everyone, do feel free to type in your questions at any point in time. But this one that we have got, Martin, I think it's a pretty good one. The question is a two-part one. So it asks, how should companies plan for a second wave in New Zealand? And the second part of that is, how will it differ to the first wave?
That's a good question. It kind of depends on a lot of things, on your organization size, on what you've already put in place for the first wave. But I don't see that it should vary that much from your planning from the first wave. The main difference, I guess, will probably be how I think anyway, and I'm very happy to discuss this, but how the government reacts to a second wave. If the government decides to go to level 4 lockdown again, which is what we did in the first wave, then I kind of see plans being quite similar. You know, a lot of companies rehearsed working from home before the first wave, and the plans and procedures could be very similar for a second wave if the government goes to level 4 lockdown. But if again, it depends on a lot of things. But if you look at Europe, look at the UK, maybe not look at the US, but they're trying to get back to business, in my opinion, far too early. And if we kind of didn't go to level 4 lockdown, then there'd be a different way of managing the second wave, I think, within organizations, because the circumstances would be different. We may have more infection, but less restriction, if that makes sense. But yeah, again, I don't know. I think it kind of depends on government reaction to a second wave.
Thanks, Martin. We've got another question here. So this one is with regard to the checklist. So it goes, what are the usual things that are crucial to be included in this list?
Again, it depends, and sorry to be a bit vague, but it kind of depends on what the crisis is. If we're talking specifically about COVID-19, it is a list of tasks for different response teams, so, or even for general staff. So a task may well be as simple as, from this date, for general staff, from this date you will be working from home. That could be a task in a checklist for general staff. Another task in a checklist for an IT team might be enable all these teams within an organization to be able to work from home. So that's another task in a checklist for a COVID-19 response. There will be lots and lots of tasks to go into that checklist for different teams in a COVID-19 situation. It really is a big subject to talk about. But yeah, it's kind of what do you need your organization or your key teams to do in a certain situation. That is the list of tasks, list of actions that you need in each. So we kind of define it via action. So we'll have an action card, we call them, per incident. So or several action cards per incident. And we even arrange them within the different phases of the incident, like we went through today. So you'll have different tasks for different incidents, depending on the phase of that incident, if that makes sense. And you can pre-assign them to different teams and different individuals to make sure they're actioned depending on the situation and the phase. So hopefully that makes sense.
We've got one more here. This is with regard to the logs and incident report. Does it only need to be high-level incidents, or incidents within the usual business operations as well count?
Yeah, both, absolutely. So obviously today we've been talking about COVID-19, which is a pretty big crisis or big incident. But a lot of our clients will use tools to respond to small incidents. You know, you can for example, more operational. So you could use them for the lift is out of action today. Communicate to everyone that's in the office that they can't use lift A or whatever it might be, or it might be even more operational than that. So Dublin in Europe, Dublin Airport is a customer of ours, and they use the tool to mobilize staff to go to their security queue. So the normal security queue that everyone goes through at an airport, Dublin Airport get fined by the Irish government if that queue gets too long. So they'll use a crisis communication tool operationally to get more staff to the security section that needs to reduce the size of the queue, just so that queue moves quicker and they don't get fined by the Irish government. So that's a kind of not a crisis situation, but it's a situation that needs to be handled relatively quickly. So yeah, from the low scale incidents right through to COVID-19, absolutely. Actually, one more comment on that. We actually say that it's better if people do use it for lower scale incidents, because then they're more used to using the tool. If a big situation does arise, everyone's more used to using it and knows what to do.
Thank you, Martin. That brings us to the end of the questions, and I think that's perfect timing because we're hovering really close to that 1 p.m. mark. Please keep in mind, everyone, that you can send any questions that you could not have a chance to type in here to either adminofficer@risknz.org.nz or directly to Martin with the contact details that have been there. I will take this opportunity to thank Martin for that very comprehensive presentation. We covered a whole lot of ground there. Thank you, Martin. And once again, thank you for taking us into your home for the presentation today. A big thank you to everyone for making the time to join us at this June Lunchtime Seminar. A reminder that Risk New Zealand's Lunchtime Seminar series wouldn't be possible without the support of our great partners, and I would like to thank them again. There is our premier partner, MASH, our crisis management partner, F24, our Lunchtime Seminar partners, SAI Global and Safety Associates, our Lunchtime Seminar supporters, the venues across the country, KPMG, Watercare, Navigators, Christchurch City Council, and PowerCo. A recording of this webinar will be shared with you soon, so that will include all the slides that Martin went through. We will also be sharing it in the members area of the Risk New Zealand website. We intend to be back with more lunchtime seminars and other activities soon, and we look forward to welcoming you to more of these activities in the near future. Stay safe and take care. Kia kaha.